A shockwave is spreading across strategic analysis centers in the US and Europe. The MAGA movement, a political force once controversial for its cautious stance on the Ukraine conflict, is now making an unprecedented move to support Kyiv. And the origin of this pivoting wave is none other than the President of the United States, Donald Trump. According to multiple sources from intelligence and defense analysis agencies, Washington is not only offering moral support, but is also gradually transferring intelligence and increasing weapons support. They are even considering a shocking move, providing Tomahawk cruise missiles to Ukraine. This development marks a completely new turning point compared to the previous strategy. President Trump, who was once considered too soft on Moscow, is now showing a tougher stance than ever before. He publicly called Russia a paper tiger and affirmed his belief that Ukraine can reclaim all the territories that have been occupied. He said, "I believe that Ukraine, with support from the European Union, can fight and reclaim all its territory according to the original borders. This is a strong statement, and it leaves no gray area at all." And is this the result of a new strategic analysis from the Pentagon? Or is it a sign that Trump is preparing for a completely new roadmap for the global role of the United States at the White House? Whatever the answer may be, it is clear that we are witnessing a major shift in strategy from both the US and the overall situation on the Ukrainian battlefield. And a new chapter may have begun. With Tomahawk missiles, the map of the conflict will change faster than ever before. So today, let's discuss this story together, everyone. First of all, we have to admit one thing. Russia has been spending millions of dollars every day for more than 3.5 years since launching its invasion of Ukraine. But what have they achieved so far? Not a single clear strategic objective has been achieved. Instead, their image has now been stripped bare. Not that of a giant, but of a paper tiger struggling in an increasingly severe economic crisis. And it was at that very moment that the White House began sending signals indicating a major pivot in its policy on memory. According to multiple informed sources, the Trump administration is considering expanding military aid to Ukraine, something that was once considered unthinkable from the traditional MAGA movement perspective. But as is often the case with President Trump, anything is possible, and it is entirely likely that a tough decision made today could be replaced by a completely new strategy in just a few weeks. However, the most noteworthy point is that Trump has not called for the US to become more directly involved. On the contrary, he has sent a clear message that the European Union should be the one primarily responsible for supporting Kyiv. In a post on Truth Social, he declared, "I wish both countries all the best. We will continue to provide weapons to NATO, and NATO can use them as they see fit. Good luck to everyone." Deciphering this statement is not difficult at all, ladies and gentlemen. Under Trump, the United States will play the role of the leading arms supplier, while European allies will act as the payers. Accordingly, missiles, military equipment, and ammunition will all be sent to the Ukrainian battlefield through massive commercial contracts. And it's not just weapons. America is also greatly benefiting from exporting natural gas to the old continent, as Europe strives to break free from its energy dependence on Russia. And clearly, from Trump's perspective, the war in Ukraine has gone beyond the realm of tactics. Now, it has become a geopolitical chessboard where the United States holds both the sword and the shield, and many people say that Trump is enabling the United States to benefit from this war. Multiple sources confirm that the Trump administration is making a clear shift in its approach to this war. We still remember that previously Trump had a very heated exchange with President Volodymyr Zelensky right in the Oval Office. At that time, both Trump and Giles Vance, the Vice President of the United States, harshly criticized Zelensky. And in the end, that meeting between the two sides turned into a disaster. But now everything has completely changed. Washington is seriously considering a complete reversal of its policy toward Kyiv, from a cautious attitude to comprehensive support. So what exactly has happened? First of all, we also need to frankly acknowledge that the flexible diplomatic strategy with President Putin did not yield results. Trump once called Putin the great man of peace and hoped that their good personal relationship would pave the way for peace. But what did we get in return? There were no concessions at all, no ceasefire, no peace guarantee, not even the slightest gesture of goodwill, and every proposal from the United States was ignored by Moscow. President Trump even believed that his personal influence could make Putin end the war, and he once told President Macron of France that, but in reality the situation on the battlefield has completely disproved that belief. Secondly, and more importantly, is the increasing technical capability of the Russian military. Recent reports show that the Iskander and Kinzhal missile lines have been reprogrammed, with their navigation algorithms changed to bypass air defense radar. They follow a standard flight path and then suddenly change direction in the final moments, making it nearly impossible for the Patriot system or equivalent shields to react in time. The interception rate has dropped. This means casualties will increase, and that's something Washington cannot ignore. In this context, Trump is not simply changing course for political reasons, but also due to practical, tactical, and technological considerations. When the adversary upgrades their technology and allies are gradually losing their defensive position, no one can afford to stand aside. The US also has to take action, whether through NATO, through Europe, or by implementing large-scale arms sales policies. They can no longer remain on the sidelines. That 6% is all that's left of Ukraine's air defense capability against Russian ballistic missiles. And that's not a figure from Moscow, it's from the Ukrainian Air Force's own report. And if that number is accurate, then we are witnessing one of the most serious strategic turning points since the war began. We know that the Patriot systems are symbols of American defense technology manufactured by Raytheon and Lockheed Martin. There used to be the last shield protecting Kyiv, but that shield is now being pierced. Missiles like Kinzhal and Iskander are no longer being intercepted as they once were. And what's worse is that Moscow is well aware of this, and they have changed their tactics. They are not only targeting missile stockpiles, but also striking directly at the technical brain of Ukraine's air defense system. A devastating blow occurred last December when Trump ta'ad Denis Sakun, the chief engineer of the 96th Brigade, who had personally operated the Patriot system to shoot down a Kinzhal hypersonic missile, was killed in a targeted attack. Now, with senior personnel gradually lost, interceptor stockpiles depleted, and winter fast approaching, and we know that nothing pleases Moscow more than turning white snow into a weapon, targeting power plants, repair stations, hospitals, and so on. Punishing the people for daring to resist, they are capable of anything. Just in the past few days, according to President Zelensky, that attack involved nearly 500 drones and more than 40 missiles raining down like fire. It's no longer a surprise attack, but a deliberate, repeated event. And it sends a chilling warning to anyone who thinks that Western air defense systems are strong enough to protect their allies until the very end. So the question is, why is Trump particularly interested in developments in Ukraine at this moment? Because if the illusion of air defense collapses, not only Ukrainians but also NATO will face an unprecedented threat in decades. And Trump understands that better than anyone. So why is Trump, who once promised to end the Ukraine war with the speed of a top negotiator, now having to consider such strong military measures? The answer has two parts, and both are extremely dangerous. First, although the battlefield in eastern Ukraine is moving very slowly, Moscow is still advancing. Every inch of land, every village, and the price they pay in blood and in dollars does not stop them from moving forward. So what about Kyiv? After months of receiving only sporadic aid from Washington, air defense forces, ammunition, and radar systems are all deteriorating. And now, as Russian missiles become increasingly accurate and powerful, even surpassing the Patriot system, no one can be sure where this battlefield is headed. In war, what causes people to lose is not bullets, but surprise. But that doesn't mean the Ukrainians are just sitting idly by. On the contrary, they're ramping up domestic weapons production to its peak. The 4-rotor Sting drone is an example of a cheap, compact, and effective design that helps save expensive missiles for intercepting larger targets. Nevertheless, Kyiv still has deadly blind spots. And Trump, as the leader of the free world, certainly doesn't want the war to end with Ukraine's collapse. Because that would not only affect his personal image, but also open the door for China to enter the game. Yes, Beijing is the second reason, ladies and gentlemen. It's clear that China is not standing on the sidelines. They are learning, gathering data from every battle, every retreat, every destroyed tank, and it's entirely possible that Beijing is viewing Ukraine as a testing ground for long-range weapons to later apply in other scenarios, very likely in Taiwan or elsewhere. And it's precisely these two reasons that have led Washington to give the green light to share long-range intelligence data with Ukraine so they can act first. The new attacks will no longer be constrained by defensive barriers, but can instead strike directly into Russian territory, targeting energy infrastructure and the critical links Moscow needs to sustain its winter war effort. And Washington is not playing alone. They are calling on NATO to get involved. There is no more time for hesitation. There are no more gray areas. The question now is no longer whether Mr. Trump will intervene, but to what extent he will intervene. General Kate Kellogg, President Donald Trump's special envoy to Ukraine, recently confirmed that Trump has authorized the use of more advanced weapon systems, including ATACMS missiles, to strike Russian territory. And Mr. Kellogg's statement leaves no doubt that this is the moment when Ukraine can challenge Russia more forcefully than ever before. However, this is not the time to celebrate yet. In reality, Ukraine's current missile stockpile is almost depleted. And now all eyes are turning to an unanswered question. Will Washington actually provide Tomahawk cruise missiles to Kiev or not? Tactically, it would be a breakthrough strike. But if you look at the financial aspect, each Tomahawk costs over $1.3 million. Production is limited, and the US domestic stockpile is not abundant either. So the actual likelihood of supplying them is not high. Not to mention Moscow's reaction. If Tomahawks are used, it will definitely go beyond the usual boundaries. And right in that strategic gap, a new name has emerged, Barracuda, a new generation American cruise missile. Although it flies at subsonic speeds and carries a smaller warhead, its price is only 1/10 that of the Tomahawk, with a range of nearly 1,000 kilometers, making it an ideal tool for high-tech war of attrition. And more importantly, the fact that these types of weapons are being openly discussed in Washington signals a fundamental shift in US strategy, despite former President Trump's previous stance, which was seen as prioritizing stable dialogue and détente with Moscow. The very act of putting the topic of long-range strikes on the negotiating table is already a major geopolitical turning point. Because in the current strategy, long-range attacks are the trump card that can turn the tide of the conflict. Ukraine is no longer just defending, they are actively striking at the core of Russia's energy chain. Let's look at the numbers. Since August, 16 out of Russia's 38 oil refineries have been attacked. What are the consequences? Either they have to cut production down to a minimum, or they are forced to shut down completely for repairs. This directly affects Moscow's ability to supply, produce fuel for the war, and even its civilian economy. And even though Russia has made progress in producing drones, upgrading missiles, or adjusting air defense algorithms to outsmart American radars, the energy battlefield is one arena where Ukraine truly has the advantage. No one can be sure how long Trump's stance will remain unchanged, but right now the picture is clearer than ever. Ukraine has crossed the red lines and is striking directly at the heart of Russia's logistics system. At the end of September, a team of Ukrainian drones carried out a precision strike targeting oil refining and petrochemical facilities belonging to Gazprom, located more than 100 kilometers deep inside Russian territory. The target is not only symbolic but also of high strategic value. These energy hubs are located in central Russia, an area considered Moscow's safest logistical zone. Now, they are no longer safe. In the following weeks, attacks continued to target other key sites. The Ryazan oil refinery, with a capacity of up to 340,000 barrels per day, also became a target and was hit. And this is no coincidence. Diesel fuel is not just a type of fuel. In Russia's military economic system, it plays a vital role, sustaining military transport operations, industrial logistics, and at the same time, it is a highly valuable export commodity. And that's exactly why Mokrina chose diesel as the strategic focus in their long-range attacks. We need to remember that Russia is still the world's second largest diesel exporter. The ability to export refined products like diesel or gasoline brings in profits many times higher than simply selling unprocessed crude oil. Therefore, every oil refinery that is destroyed not only affects domestic supply, but also erodes the financial resources that sustain Russia's war machine. And this is truly a lethal blow from Ukraine, a strike that hits directly at Russia's wallet, the wallets of the oligarchs and the Russian elite, and its impact is no longer just theoretical. Russia has just officially extended the gasoline export ban until the end of 2025. This is an extremely rare move from a country that was once a global energy powerhouse. Current estimates show that Russia is facing a domestic gasoline shortage of up to 20%, and its impact has already reached the public. Out of 50 gas stations, at least one has completely stopped selling gasoline. In some areas, people have to wait in long lines just to fill up their tanks. Even in the Russian-controlled Crimean Peninsula, as well as many regions in Siberia, limited fuel distribution measures have already been implemented. Meanwhile, prices are skyrocketing. The wholesale price of A95 gasoline in Russia has surged by as much as 45% this year, despite the fact that global crude oil prices are trending downward. And after gasoline, now it's diesel's turn, the key pillar of Russia's logistics and military machine. Ukraine understands this well, and they are striking precisely at that point. They strike using cheap, locally made drones that can fly hundreds or even thousands of kilometers through Russia's complex air defense networks and target those objectives whose destruction would have the highest strategic impact, namely energy. Russia's diesel output has dropped to its lowest level since 2020 after Ukraine's long-range attacks. In other words, the decline in Russia's diesel production is similar to the period when they were heavily affected by the COVID-19 pandemic and the nationwide lockdown. More than 1 million barrels of refined fuel per day have disappeared from the market. In the context of an already shaken global energy supply chain, such a sharp drop in production is directly driving international fuel prices to soar, especially in Europe and developing countries. And if Ukraine continues to maintain its current pace of attacks, experts believe that Russia's diesel exports could drop to their lowest level in more than half a decade. In other words, Kiev is having to use an energy warfare strategy to weaken Moscow's war machine. And initially, it has already proven effective. Russia's diesel situation is also beginning to mirror the scenario with gasoline. Moscow has also issued a partial ban on diesel exports until the end of the year, while extending the gasoline export ban that was previously implemented. And that is the clearest sign that their energy supply lines are under heavy pressure. 1/3 of Russia's state budget comes from oil and refined product exports, but this revenue source has been continuously declining for many months. In September alone, refined product exports dropped another 10% compared to August. And this is not an isolated decrease, but part of a continuous decline that has persisted since the second quarter. From a military perspective, this shows that Ukraine's long-range attacks on Russia's energy chain are achieving results beyond expectations, and it could even be expanded further if Ukraine continues to have access to intelligence, defense system maps, and long-range precision strike capabilities such as cruise missiles and advanced drones. And this is precisely the context that convinced President Trump, who once called for Moscow to negotiate soon, that there are still many viable strategic options instead of choosing compromise or retreat. When strikes on energy infrastructure prove effective, both soft and hard power can be combined to undermine Russia's will to fight. Earlier this year, President Trump confidently declared, "We have reached an immediate ceasefire agreement concerning all energy facilities and essential infrastructure." However, just a few months later, Washington's stance had completely changed. Not stopping at intelligence reports, the Trump administration is now considering providing heavy offensive weapons to Kyiv. These weapons, which are capable of extending the range of attacks deeper into Russian territory, were once considered a red line in US military strategy. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, this is the new strategic reality of the war and also the clearest evidence of the White House's shift in stance. The question now is not just whether Washington will continue to support Ukraine, but also whether President Trump's strategic adjustment is a long-term change or merely a temporary phase. Before returning to the path of diplomatic reconciliation with Moscow, what will President Trump do? Let's wait and see. At this point, today's program will pause here. Goodbye and see you again.